Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene.
And I'm your co-host, Bruce.
And today, Bruce, we are going to talk about staghorn ferns.
One of my favorite ferns.
Do you ever call them elkhorn ferns?
I do not.
Yes. I know that's something someone corrected me one time. They're like, that's elkhorn ferns. I'm like, okay.
And I would say to them, and that's the problem with common names.
Yeah, good point. So we might as well start off saying, what is the genus?
The genus is Platycerium.
Or Platycerium.
Or Platycerium, depending on if you want to pronounce it correctly or not.
Oh. Well, so
who's correct? I will not say.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what? That's pretty dang close on both sides. So we're going to take it. Yeah. What's nice is it's one genus for all of them. Yeah, and it's in the Polypodiaceae family.
Otherwise known as the fern family.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of fern. There's a lot of families in the fern group, though.
That's true.
Yes. But yeah, they are a fern. So why don't you go, before we even talk about how they grow, what makes them a fern?
Well, ultimately, the easiest thing about a fern is that the thing to think of is that they produce by spores versus seeds. There are other plants which produce by spores also, but those are fern allies. So essentially, ferns are not flowering plants. They're not conifers. They're actually the more primitive than that. And they are plants that evolved before this whole seed process began. So that's, to me, the ultimate way to define a fern. They propagate from spores.
Correct.
They do not flower.
Yep. Yeah. And so actually people recognize them and people love them because they are unique looking. And I'm just going to go into a little bit about their growth habit and how they survive and how they grow as plants. So they are epiphytic, meaning they grow on other plants, trees. They're not parasitic, meaning they do not tap into any portion of the host plant. They simply live on the other plant mainly to get sunlight. I would say epiphytic plants, if they were to, fall, their seeds or spores were to land on the ground, it would take a lot of time for them to grow up and get sunlight. So this is sort of like instant access to sunlight. It's not to say that they want full sun. They just need more light than what would be on the forest floor, because a lot of them are from denser forests, not all. So a spore lands on the side of a tree, it starts growing. So great, it has sunlight. Now, how the heck is this plant going to get water and nutrients how we would normally get from the soil? Well, staghorn ferns, they do have minimal root systems. They have a rhizome, which is a modified stem, and from that are little tufts of a small root system that basically anchors it to the plant. And so, yes, they could get some water from that as it rains, a lot of fog, it'll get water. And of course, as it rains, it's not a pristine environment. So if you picture just, say, a dead branch 5 feet above where the staghorn fern's growing, maybe there's pockets of debris as that branch is dying or collected. It's going to create its own compost water as it rains. So it gets that as its nutrients. If you've looked at staghorn ferns, you know that, they sort of have they have two different types of leaves. They have the shield leaves, what are the basal leaves that grow flat. And those are used to capture debris falling down. So dead leaves from up above, bird poo, insects, even dead mammals possibly could fall.
Ew.
I know, wedged in there. And that's how they get the food. So they basically create their own compost piles. And how they get their water is those basal leaves do not fall off. They build up into layers. So if you ever gone up to one and pushed your hand, those basal leaves are like a sponge. So it holds on to the moisture there. So it stays really wet. So that's how they get their water and their nutrients. And then you have these fertile fronds that are cascading down. And if you were to look on the back side of those and see this big brown sort of cluster, that's the sori. That's your cluster of sporangia, which is where the spores are at. So you have both that are actively photosynthetic, but one is the fertile one, one's non-fertile. But then one acts as sort of a water storage and nutrient catching
There
plant.
you go.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of how they grow. Now, where are they? They're not just from one locale.
No, they're from many different parts of the world. They're from Asia, Africa, South America, and there are quite a few from Australia.
Yeah, you're mentioning that there's none from North America, though.
There's none from North America except the ones that grow at the local nursery.
There you go. And the conservatories and people's houses. Yes.
And that's right.
Yeah. So, I did a inventory today at work, and there's 18 species of Platycerium. We have 9.
Wow.
And we did not have that many up until a few weeks ago. A gentleman passed away, and he donated his collection to us. And it was pretty amazing. From that, we got some new species of Platyceriums.
Yeah, ones that we've been looking for a while.
Because they could be really hard to find and are expensive.
Yes,
So, yeah.
especially the rare ones, which of course are the coolest looking ones. As we all know.
I know. Yeah. So people do want to grow them at home, and it's very possible to. What would you say? Which ones would you say out of all the species what are some species people could grow, and how would you go about growing them?
Well, I would say that the good news is the easiest species to grow and the most available is also one of the more cool looking ones, which is Platycerium bifurcatum. And you see this now pretty much, you can even find these being sold in the big box stores. Of course, they're sold at a lot of local nurseries. And I think, and by the way, it can even grow outdoors in our Zone 9B climate. So the way I grow mine is like we grow, frankly, almost all Platycerium. I grow them mounted on plaques. And I think that the way, when you think about that, they are grown epiphytically or on the side of trees, your plaque is essentially mimicking a tree. The plant, you have to tie the plant on to begin with, but essentially the plant is growing connected to the wood and as if it were on a tree in the wild.
So what are your, I mean, I know at the conservatory our plaques, when we could get it, we get cork oak.
Right.
It's very expensive, the bark of cork oak, but it doesn't break down that much. And then just recently for propagating, redwood fence posts.
And that works fine.
Yeah, as long as they're small. But redwood tends to not break down as quick as other woods. Like pine probably wouldn't be good. I think cedar's okay.
Yeah, I've done on cedar. I do prefer using oak also, cork also, and I think that works very well. But we had a plant that was just sort of hanging out, doing nothing, a Platycerium andinum in the conservatory. And we just found a nice big piece of redwood mounted, and this plant just took off, and it's become I think it's our prized possession in the Platycerium right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, they look great when they're mounted. And then a lot of them, they propagate from spores, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But many of them will sort of just produce these pups, plantlets. And
yes, and that's a great way to improve your collection, to increase your collection size.
So in the wild, if you think about that tree trunk growing, it will just start grasping around that tree trunk, and that's what it'll do with a piece of wood as well. And we had a Viecii, which is another great one for outside, which I'll let you talk about in a bit. Donated. This person contacted us years ago and said, "Hey, my grandfather started this in 1946." And it moved everywhere with him. And she's like, "It moved with us. I can't move it another time." She's like, "It's 5 feet across." She's like, "Will you take it?" And I said, "Yes, but to be honest, we're going to have to chop it up because 5 feet, we don't have space. Might take the whole greenhouse."
Large.
Yeah. So the one thing I always tell people when they donate Staghorn ferns, because we had several, is can you please not water it for a bit? Because remember, those leaves act like a sponge, and it's much nicer carrying a dry sponge than a really wet sponge.
And you would be surprised how heavy even a not so big one is.
Yeah.
To get one has a base that's a foot across, which is big for a house plant, but it's not as big as some of the ones we have. And that's quite heavy. That only weighs 25, 30 pounds.
Yeah. And then when you add, I don't even know how much water they would hold, but that would be a fun experiment to see how much water. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you when I was doing our division of some plants that we had a bifurcatum for sale, they were just soaked up sponges. So
yeah,
and I would say it's at least 50% of that volume is water, if not more.
Yeah. So we did chop that one up. And what we did is we took 2 wire baskets, like plant baskets. We zip tied them together to make a globe. And we packed it full of sphagnum moss in the inside. And then we wired some of the small plants after we chopped them up. And I'll let you explain how we chop them up. But that was several years ago. And at first it sort of like the earth, and you could see the individual continents with the ocean between. And now it looks like Pangea, where all the continents just merge together. And
evolution
really
in action.
Yeah. So now it's a perfectly round sphere. I'm not going to lie. We've had a lot of our mounted Staghorn ferns, just the metal wire degrades and over time. And I've come in where many of them have fallen on the ground, and some of our larger ball ones, we have large chain, but that still breaks down over time. And so I always recommend that people don't stand underneath any of our Staghorn ferns at work.
Never thought of that.
Oh, I haven't told you, Bruce. Don't
That's
feel
because,
offended.
I'm just a volunteer at the conservatory, so they want to protect the volunteers most of all.
Actually, yes, we must protect you at all costs. Please don't stand underneath. So let's go back a little bit into the division. So let's say if someone wants to divide them and they have one that does produce offshoots, what is your protocol for doing it?
Sure.
You already talked about what you want to mount them on, so then go from there.
Okay. Well, first let me just say, when you're dividing a staghorn, show no mercy.
No, you're correct.
If you sit there and say, well, I want to tease out the leaves and this and that, number one, you'll be spending a tremendous amount of time. Number two, it's a dirty process. And number three, it's totally not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So when I divide the plants, we had this very big one that I divided into probably 10 plants. I take a nice sharp saw. If the plant is grown on a mount, I take it off the mount if I can. I take a nice sharp handsaw and just cut it up, and making sure that I have a growing point and enough space around it that it could be frankly mounted just physically, so it could be tied onto the plaque. Let's just say I have a plant now that's around 4 inches on the base or 5 or 6 inches on the base with some leaves on it. So what we'll do is we're going to take a piece of wood, cork, whatever we decide to use, that is a little bit bigger by around 3 or 4 inches on all sides than the piece of than the cutting or the division. So first thing I want to do is make sure that there's no bugs, or when I say bugs, I don't mean like little mealy bugs. We'll talk about that. But I mean in our greenhouses that there are no roaches in the base of the plant. Because it's an unpleasant experience when you go to look at your plants and you find roaches popping out.
What? You're not talking about our plants at the conservatory at all.
No, never. But no, seriously. So I want to make sure there's nothing, disgusting in there that I want to get rid of first.
Yeah.
So I make sure the plant is clean. I will go over it and remove any pieces that are rotted. If there are mealybugs, aphids, scale on it, I want to clean it off first for several reasons, not the least of which is you want a clean plant. But in addition, you're going to be mounting this plant and you're going to be using some sphagnum moss. You don't want those insects to be covered by the moss so that it gives them a nice, safe place to grow, and you don't know they're there. Okay, so I've got my plant, I've got my plaque. I need to be using something to connect the plant to the plaque. So that will be generally, I'll use nylon cord, nylon fishing line. Some people use string, but the problem with string is if you're using cotton string, it'll disintegrate very quickly. But I think the nylon thread is best. Then I will take some long fiber sphagnum moss. Now, these days you can get that pretty much anywhere. There are different qualities of that. I don't use the super expensive high quality. I use a moderate quality, medium priced sphagnum for that. And I'll take some of the sphagnum, make sure that you moisten it first because sphagnum is very dry and compact when it's dry. So you want to moisten it to get it to absorb enough water and to get it to expand to its full size. I'll take some of that and place it on underneath the division. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the very first thing I need to do is actually take the nylon fishing line and take a nice long piece, and I'm talking 10 feet if the plant is a big plant, at least 5 or 6 feet for a medium-sized plant. And I want to tie that first onto the plaque. The reason I want to do that first is, number one, it'll be tight and it'll give me the plaque will basically enable me to pull the line tight. So when I tie the plant on, it's well held. And number two is there's nothing worse than trying to tie on a piece of nylon thread onto a plaque while you're trying to hold the plant on the plaque at the same time. It just doesn't work. So I get my piece of nylon thread tied onto the plaque so that it's ready to go. Then I take my division. I use about, I'm going to say, a 1/2 inch thick pad of sphagnum under the plant. Some people use more. My concern is always that too much sphagnum behind the plant might cause it to hold too much water. And if I'm a frequent waterer, which I am, then I may run into problems down the road. So I have a nice padding to connect the plant to the plaque. I have enough sphagnum in there to keep the roots moist, and the roots will grow into the sphagnum. Then what I'll do is I'll take some sphagnum and place it on top of the frond of the shield fronds. The reason I do that is not so much for keeping the water in the plant or keeping it moist, but it's that the nylon thread is very thin and can dig into the leaves of the shield frond, and it just doesn't look good. And frankly, if the leaves are getting split by the nylon thread, that might be an opportunity for rot to set in when it's mounted. Okay, so I've got my sphagnum moss in place, just little bits where the nylon thread will be, and then I will tie the plant onto the mount. The way to do that is you now have your plant, you're holding your plant, and you basically just loop it around the plant in different areas, some below the growing point, some above, so that the plant is firmly held. That's the whole thing. And when you're done, when you feel your plant is well positioned and is not going to fall off, then you tie the nylon thread off. Make sure you put a label on the plant if you know what the name is. I actually will make a hole in the label and tie it through the thread so that way it's not going to fall off the plant when I'm not looking. That's it. It's the super easiest thing to do. And frankly, you do want to have a hook on your plaque so that you can hang it on the wall. Probably should put that in before you do anything else.
Yeah, no, it was funny because the plant that you were dividing the other day, I went, Bruce, why are you putting sphagnum on top of the plant? And you said, oh, it's so the fishing line doesn't cut into the leaves. And that's true because I always feel bad because you need this fishing line to be tight. And as you're doing it tight, it does cut into the shield leaf. So I always feel bad. So yeah, that's a good idea.
That's why I do it. And by the way, one thing I've noticed is I would say 75% of the time, I think I've taken enough fishing line to tie the plant off and to go around enough times just to hold it firmly. 75% of the time, I don't take enough. So feel free to do 10 feet. You can always cut it off afterwards.
It's not like the most expensive product.
It is not.
No.
And it's really a pain in the neck when you've got it halfway around. Now the plant is being held there and you have to hold it in position. You have to cut another 5 feet of nylon thread. You have to make a really good knot to connect the two. Otherwise, it's just going to slide right off.
That's
and the plant will fall and you will say, darn.
Story of my life because I'm horrible with knots. Now, I went and I bought a whole bunch of serrated bread knives for the interns last quarter to do. Because serrated bread knives work really well to cut. And I wanted to sort of just go back to where you cut. So a lot of people, they see this big mass of a staghorn fern. Now, and you said the growth point. So the growth point is where the cluster, where all the leaves are coming out. That's a center point. You need to have that. And then you have the flat shield leaves that will probably be green. Sometimes you could have a growth point and there's no green shield leaves. They're all brown. That's okay as long as you have green growth coming out of that growth point. And if you can, follow around it, sort of like trace the line, cut around that shield leaf If you cut into the shield leaf, that is fine. And how deep do you go? As deep as you can. And when you, I always,
Right. And as deep as you have to, and as deep as you can.
yes, as deep as you can. I always picture cutting into a chocolate cake because you could see the layers of the dead leaves, and the thicker, the better. But sometimes that's difficult to mount, and sometimes you don't need that because the rhizome is closer to the surface, and there's not that many roots further down. So as long as you get several layers of dead leaves, like say an inch of the older leaves and the sponge part and the growth point, and some of the basal leaves, the shield leaves, then you're okay. But just try to trace around the shield leaf. And it's not going to be perfect. If you cut into them, that's fine.
And another thing to note when you're doing that is that one of the, I don't call it a problem, one of the issues when you're cutting your plant up to make the divisions is that if you're going to mount it on something flat, you need a flat bottom, a flat back, I should say. So if you have, a lot of times we'll divide them and we'll end up with like a triangular shaped wedge. And as much as I do not like cutting off active roots, because a lot of those roots are living, even though they might not look it, you have no choice. Otherwise, the plant's just going to rock. It's not going to position well. So you do have to cut it off so that the back surface is flat.
And we've grown them where we've had no space to mount them and hang them. We've grown them in like orchid baskets. So you just fill that basket with sphagnum moss and you plant it on top, and you could have the pot laying there.
Right.
And that's as you've encountered that, because some of ours that were, as you're trying to divide them, you're like, wait a minute, why am I encountering this plastic pot in this? So it makes it more difficult at the end to, but you don't have to mount them.
No, you don't. And you can grow them in the plastic orchid pots, the little baskets. One of the funny things is that it's a plant that knows top from bottom, so that if you put in a pot with it mounted in there, eventually it's going to work its way around the sides of the pot, and it'll look very similar to a mounted plant anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So say you have your mounted plant, or say you went to the nursery and you got a bifurcatum. So a lot of people want to grow them as house plants. So talk about a little bit how you would grow it inside.
Well, growing them inside is very doable. The first thing is you need to talk about your sun exposure. They are, of course, plants that in the wild grow in a very shady environment, but our houses, even in the sunniest windows, are not necessarily that bright. So I would first of all place it near a south or an east exposure. If you have fluorescent lighting, they'll do in your, let's say, a plant room with a fluorescent lighting, they'll do very well under fluorescent lights. If you're growing them mounted, you need to put them against a wall or something flat to hang them from. So in that situation, it becomes a little bit awkward if you want to have them in a window, but you want to have them mounted facing the light. That's why I actually grow mine under lights. And I think if you have a nice, strong fluorescent bank of lights on your ceiling, you can grow them against the wall. The leaves will get plenty of light from above, and they'll do very well. But a main thing is that fluorescent lights, east exposure or south exposure, but not directly at the glass in a south exposure.
Yeah, and my thing with growing them inside as houseplants is the watering. Because that could be an issue.
First of all, they can be grown indoors in water. I mean, grown indoors, and you can water them indoors, and you will do fine. But of course, if they're mounted when you water them, the water is going to go all over the place. The issue for that is you can just mist them daily with a very strong mist, not just a little wispy mist, but basically spritz on water all over the base of the plant and underneath the crown of the base of the shield fronds, and that will work for the most part. You still want to take them outside periodically and drench them, but I think that will work. But if you're growing them in baskets, then you can just take them to the sink and just water them that way.
Yeah, when it's small, it's fine because you could take it outside or bring it to the bathtub. But once they start getting big and you want to fully soak it, it could be a problem. So when I hear about people growing them inside, I'm always like, oh, when they're small, but when they start getting big, I
Right.
don't want to
Which
carry that thing
I didn't
outside.
want to say that you can't grow them inside because you can, but they'll eventually outgrow not
Yes.
all of them, but they will
Yes.
outgrow your space.
Yeah. But like you said, the bifurcatum could grow in zone 9B, grows outside just fine. And there's a few other species that will do okay outside as well.
Absolutely. I want to start with the bifurcatum outdoors. It's I would say it's probably most cold tolerant of the Platycerium.
Mhm.
It's also the cheapest, which means that if you get a plant and it lasts 5 years and then it freezes, I'm sorry for the plant, of course, but you can get another one. It's not a tremendous loss in money. And because they grow relatively quickly, it's not that much of a loss in time. But the main thing is when you're growing them outdoors, you need to have really good protection against the sun because they will burn
Mhm.
if they get direct sun.
Yeah. So underneath, mounted on a large, like you could technically mount it directly to a tree, but I would still mount it on a piece of wood and then hang it on a tree, or hang it on a fence and just make sure it doesn't get that afternoon south or west exposure.
And frankly, a northern exposure for outdoors on bifurcatum works fine because I have mine. I've had some that are northern exposures on a north wall where my garage is. I grow them on the wall of the garage, and they're perfectly happy.
Yeah.
So outdoors northern exposure is okay.
Yeah. And then so much easier to water them. You could just water them with the hose. They're not finicky. I mean, I say they're not finicky about water, but I've never tried growing them with this horrific water I have at my house. So they probably die. And then fertilizing. There is the myth, oh, you put a banana peel in them. Well, that's because I mentioned how they compost their own food, but I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't put a banana peel in them. I would use banana peels for my compost heap. All I do is I use, your base. We've talked about this before, your basic 20-20-20 fertilizer. I use it if I'm going to water. If I'm going to feed with every watering, I'll use like 1/8 strength. If I'm going to feed weekly, I'll use quarter strength. I just do that periodically. I'll just mix them up, pour it over the plant. That's it. You can also use Osmocote, which is really nice because then you don't have to deal with mixing up fertilizer periodically. Osmocote is a slow release fertilizer, and it works very well on these plants.
And if it's grown outside under a tree, it is going to get dead leaf debris, insect poo. So it's sort of going to be growing like how it would in the wild. But a supplemental fertilizer is always a good idea.
And I will say that I have planted them on my palm trees. I would tie them onto the base of the palm tree. I would start out with one division, and I kid you not, after 2 or 3 years, the entire tree was surrounded by this plant. It went entirely around a queen palm, which when you're about 8 feet high is relatively thick. So it just grew an entire foot diameter stem around that.
They could grow really quick when they're happy. Yeah.
Oh, that's the beauty part of it. If you should lose one to frost, you just get a new one, place it on a maybe more protected area, but they'll come back.
Yeah. And then Veitchii is the other one that I think tolerates our conditions.
Right. And the beauty of Veitchii is that it's a drought tolerant type, and it's from Australia. So it's not from the outback where it's never rains, but it is much more drought tolerant than any of the other staghorns. So, and it's very cold tolerant. So you can grow that outdoors and you'll be very successful even if it's a dry summer, as long as you make sure that you do irrigate it.
Yeah.
It's also smaller.
Yeah, it is smaller. Yeah, that's the one that we made into a ball. I believe it is Veitchii. So the fronds themselves are smaller, so it's more compact. And I think it has a little more of a gray tinge, a slight more gray tinge.
It is definitely a grayer, if you like that bluish grayish color in your plants. It definitely has that. And it's nice because a lot of the staghorns can have a tendency to look alike. There are some that are very distinct, but when you get your bifurcatums and your Wallachii and a couple of others, which we'll talk about, the leaf form is very similar. And sometimes the difference is in the basal fronds, the shield fronds is where there's a difference. But what's nice is that has this great grayish green leaf, which is really great.
And people may be asking, well, how do I know when to water them? I'll go through our staghorn hallway, and I'll just do a push test. I'll feel either in the top or I'll push. Now, definitely if you push on the basal fronds and water comes out, you know it's really wet. I'll touch the top. If I feel moisture, I'm like, okay, it could skip a day, or if it's incredibly hot that day, I think it's going to dry out. So if you feel moisture, you could skip a day. It's where you touch it and everything's bone dry. And even the sphagnum moss, remember when sphagnum moss gets dry, it's really hard to re-wet. So if it's young and you're relying on that sphagnum moss for those roots, make sure that doesn't dry out as well. So once the plant becomes mature, that sphagnum moss doesn't matter so much, but always push and feel the basal leaves to see if they're bone dry, then you need to sit there and soak it for a bit, just like you would a sponge.
And as the plants get bigger, what you'll notice is, so when the plant is young, the shield fronds are stuck fast to the wood. So you really can't get your fingers necessarily behind it. But as the plant gets bigger, it's going to start to expand, and you'll end up with and sort of like a bird's nest effect. And if you can stick your finger inside and just feel the roots, the inside of the leaves directly, you'll know pretty easily if this plant is in need of water.
So you're attempting to, because we've always just propagated by doing divisions, and that works for most of them, but like Platycerium superbum doesn't produce offshoots.
That's right. So when you're growing Platycerium superbum, or I believe granding, there's only one growth point. If that dies, that's the end of the plant. I don't think it's going to branch just because it's lost its main growth.
Yeah.
So you cannot divide those.
So you're doing one. That's spores are the only way to propagate. And for a lot of them that are either slow to do offshoots, spores are the way to go. And I had a student who was into it, but he sort of was like, oh, dabble in it, forgets about it, dabbles in it, forgets about it. I was really excited for him to do it. But you're doing it.
Right. And I think that, like we say, for the ones that can't be divided, you need to expand your collection of that particular species by spore. And for the ones that are just very slow to make new growth points, you could do it by division, but you might wait 5 years to get one division. So what I do is, for me, it's fun, and also it's a great way to really inexpensively increase your collection. And some of these are extremely expensive because they're just hard to come by. They're not necessarily harder to grow, but for some reason, bifurcatum is the one that pretty much everyone sells, and they're not interested in selling anything other than that, it seems. So when you want these other ones that are hard to get, you might not be able to buy a plant for under $100. But you can get spores for a few bucks or free if you accidentally should bump into a plant when you're visiting, not us, but other botanical gardens, and it gets in your shirt, and you got home and you brush it off on some soil, and well, what do you know? So I kid.
He kids. But I mean, if you happen to fall into it, I mean, come on,
So I guess let's talk a little bit about people. We always say ferns produced by spores. What the heck is a spore anyway?
What the heck?
So typically when we buy plants, we either buy, full-grown plants, or we go to this nursery and buy a packet of seeds. And a seed you'll put in the soil, you'll sprout, and you'll get the plant you want. But that's not how ferns work. Ferns reproduce by spores. And what that means is the little fuzz that you see on the bottom of a fern leaf, that's not a seed. It's not going to make the plant directly. It's a spore. What will happen is the spore will start to grow. And let's just say when you're planting your spores, I just use my basic mix, which is nothing more than store-bought soil with some additives like perlite and vermiculite, and charcoal. So I have my own mix, and you can use your own mix if you like to play with soil, or you can just buy.
Now, do you sterilize it? Do you add it? Do you sterilize it further? Do you put it in the microwave?
I didn't say that part yet.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
Sure.
Sorry. Okay.
No, I probably would have forgotten to say it anyway.
Okay.
But I do sterilize whenever I'm growing stuff from seed. That's expensive seed, hard to get seed, or something that's going to take a while to sprout. I do sterilize the soil. I don't sterilize if I'm sprouting zinnias or marigolds because there's no point in that. But yes, I sterilize the soil. And then what I do is will take the spores. So next thing you do is you're going to take the spores and you place them, you just sprinkle them over the soil. Just don't worry about it. If you're not going to sprinkle enough, just sprinkle as much as you want because it's not all going to sprout. So then what happens is after a couple of weeks, you'll start to see a greenish fuzz on the top of the soil. You may think this is moss, and it may be moss because you're not always successful in getting the spores to sprout. But typically, if you are successful, you'll start to see these greenish, shiny greenish, almost like a scum on top of the soil. That scum is actually lots and lots of little spores sprouting. And over time, you'll start to see what they call a prothallus, which is a heart-shaped little green thing. I don't know. It's a plant.
It looks
basically.
like a flat disc.
Yeah, it's a disc. And it will be, you'll get them, they'll also be sort of shiny and a little slimy looking. The reason they're shiny and slimy looking is because they're only a couple of cells thick. I think it might be 3 or 4 cells thick. It's what they call the gametophyte generation versus the sporophyte generation. That gets a little bit more botanical, but what's going to happen is that those little prothalli are going to produce egg cells and sperm cells. And believe it or not, the sperm, like I think I forgot the name of what they call them, but the part of the plant that produces the sperm cell.
Is it the archegonium and then the antheridium?
Yeah. They're going to. There'll be little sperm cells swimming around underneath the prothallus in the watery soil mixture that you have. It will find an egg and it will fertilize that egg, and that will produce what we call the sporophyte generation, which is the actual fern plant. It sounds a little complicated, and it is when you're growing them, because when you grow a regular seed plant, that's all you're doing is sprouting the seed. You don't have to produce a plant that will produce gametes that will then produce the plant. So it's a little more complicated. It requires careful monitoring of the water levels because you don't want to be too much or it'll rot. But if it dries out, then those little prothalli will die. So that's the difference between a spore producing plant and a seed producing plant. So now you have these little ferns, and it will take a while for them to get big enough that you can start to mount them. I did a spore of our Platycerium andinum, which is one of the more expensive and very difficult to find staghorns. I put probably an eighth of a teaspoon of spore on a 2.5-inch pot. I ended up with 4 plants by the time it was all said and done. So you're not going to get 100,000 plants from 100,000 spores. If you get 4, consider yourself happy and lucky.
So there's a few things I want to go back. First of all,
sure.
I think people may be wondering, sterilizing soil. How do you go about sterilizing your soil?
I just take the pots, I water them first. I put them in the microwave for 30 seconds. And I let it cool, and then I sow my spores. I will say that I've also taken a thermometer into the soil just to see what it is. Generally, I think 160 to 180 degrees is probably warm enough to kill pretty much everything. Yeah,
so the microwave works great. Just make sure the soil is moist because it helps sort of I don't know.
Right.
Just basically
because what microwaves work by heating up water.
Yeah, heats up the water.
If you put dry soil in, it'll get warmer because there's some water in there, but not enough to necessarily.
And then don't put the spores in when it's hot still.
No.
Yeah. And then as far as knowing when, so if you look on the underside of a staghorn fern, it's the cluster of spores. It's called a sori. I always joke and say it's a site for sori. You get as an optometrist, you should use that.
Yes,
one.
as a former optometrist in my previous life,
you approve of that
we would
pun.
laugh at that.
Oh, I'm sure.
The cows came home.
Oh, yep. So it's a big cluster of brown. So one, how do people know when, quote, the spores are ripe? And then do you put them in a bag and sort of let them fluff off first?
What I do is I just will go to the plant. I'll do a little tapping over a piece of white paper.
Yeah. Okay.
And see what comes off.
Okay.
And then I'll just take a little, if I'm going to want enough spores so I can make make plants,
Hmm.
I'll cut off a piece of the leaf, or depending on the size of the leaf, I will make a big, might cut the whole leaf off. But generally, I
Hmm.
just cut off where the spore is on the back side of the leaf, the other side of the leaf, put it on a piece of paper, fold that paper up, seal it so that it doesn't come out, and just let it sit there for an hour or two, and then open it up and see what's there.
Okay. And then when you put the spores on, you want to make sure that it stays moist. So probably a humidity dome
Yes,
works
mine
best.
actually grow in a humidity dome so that the with I would add a little computer fan inside so that
Ooh.
there's constant air
Ooh.
circulation.
Yeah. Air circulation's important. Yeah. You want it to
And
be moist, but you want that air to flow around. Yeah.
right. And this sometimes all I'll get is moss
Yeah.
because either the spores were they were not
Hmm.
ripe, they were not viable, and that happens. And sometimes I will get, a combination of the two. But the main thing is that the soil needs to be moist before you put the spores on. Do
Hmm.
not cover them.
Hmm.
Just leave
Correct.
them on the top.
Yep.
I haven't had a major mold issue. People do sprinkle cinnamon as a it's an
Fungal.
antibiotic. I don't know if it's an
It's
antifungus.
antifungal. Yeah. It is
Ah,
antifungal.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You could dip your cuttings in it. Um, um, yeah. So it's true. I mean, you think about it, the rarer the plant, there's a reason why some of these plants are rare in cultivation, even because they're not easy to grow or germinate. So you're going to have lower. So of all the spores we have at work, I mean, you think of all the bifurcatums we have with all those spores. Every once in a while, we will get a weed, quote, weed staghorn fern come up. So it just happened that the spore landed and germination happened, or I should say fertilization happened. There you go. And
Botanies.
yes, and it started growing. We haven't had one in a while, and we haven't had any from other than the bifurcatum, which is the most common popular one.
Now,
So,
I would just like to add something to that, which is sort of funny or interesting
mhm,
when you think about it. We have, I don't know, I'm going to say around 30 or so bifurcatums. It might be 50, but
mhm,
let's just say 30. Each bifurcatum will produce probably at any given time 5 or 6 or more fertile leaves, fertile meaning the ones with the spores. Each fertile leaf will have, I don't know, you're going to say 100,000 or so spores on it or more.
you know what? I stopped it at 50,000 counting. I was just kidding. I
You
don't
actually
know.
counted, I'm going to say easily
There
100,000.
we go. Sounds good to me.
So we have several million spores floating around in the greenhouse at any given time, and we got one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just saying that it's not that you can't do it. It's more saying that being successful in getting 5 plants from one pot of spores, that's great.
Hmm. Yeah. And where was I going with this? I completely just
Ah,
drew a blank.
well,
Completely drew a
those
blank.
annoying
Yeah.
New Yorkers. We're talking about how we'll occasionally get
No, I know. And I
plants.
was going off of that. There was something really poignant
We
and
were talking about
important.
how the ones that are hard to come by,
Yeah.
the only way you're going to get
Yeah,
them is
yeah,
from
yeah.
spores.
Yeah, no, I still, nope, still can't remember. But
Oh.
moving on. So in theory, we do have, I was going through my collection before we go through the list of them. We do have one hybrid. So it's possible to do hybrids. This one was Elamaria, which is a hybrid of Elephantotis and Andinum. And so, in theory, how you would do a hybrid is you would somehow get, say, the sperm from one and get it to the
Right.
egg of the other one.
So here's the funny thing. When you do a hybrid of a flowering plant or even a conifer, you take the pollen of one plant, you put it onto the stigma or the female portion of the other plant, and then you get new seed, and those seeds are hybrids. When you do it with a fern, it's really much more basic and in some ways easier. You just take the spores of plant A, you mix them up with the spores of plant B, you put them in one pot, and then each one is going to produce the gametes for that species. The little sperm from, let's just say, Platycerium bifurcatum are going to swim around under that prothallus. Some of them are going to just go right to the same prothallus and make more plants of bifurcatum. The little sperm from the Staghorn, let's just say Platycerium andinum, are going to do the same. But some of them are going to be far traveling sperm cells, and they will get to the other prothallus that's next to it. That may be a different species. So that's how you get the cross. So anytime you make a cross with ferns, when you're done, if you get enough plants, you would typically get some of for species 1, some of species 2, and hopefully some of the cross. You'll actually get 3 different types from the cross, which is not the same as crossing 2 flowering plants and getting different genes expressed.
Yeah. So that's the only hybrid that we have. I want to go through some of our species. I remembered I was going to say it wasn't that poignant. It was going to say it was funny how we're talking about how difficult it is to propagate from spores, but other ferns are our biggest weed problem in the conservatory.
Right.
So they germinate. Some certain ferns just germinate like crazy, and you're like, seriously? So yeah, as long as you give them a wet surface, a lot of ferns will just be like, woohoo.
And some of us love maidenhair ferns, and those are a great weed.
They can be a great weed, yes, or they could be an annoying weed. It depends on where they grow, right? A weed, a plant, out of place. Okay, so obviously we're going to talk about, we have Platycerium bifurcatum, could grow outside, grows inside. This is the one that we propagate a lot for plant sales because it grows really fast. It pups really fast. People could grow it outside or inside. And so that's probably, as you said, the one we have the most. And that one's from Australia and Southeast Asia. And then next is Veitchii, as you mentioned. That one also can handle our temperatures outside, a little bit more gray. It's from Australia. Still pups pretty well. You said takes drier conditions.
Right.
And then our largest one growing, our largest actual plant growing, which I think I want to say it's at least 30 years old, is the Superbum, which does not pup. So it's very dramatic looking, because it has these giant basal shield leaves that grow up. And that's above our main entrance. And that one I'm always afraid is going to fall down. And I'd love to get spores of that one. And it's Superbum, but for fun, you could call it Superbum.
That's right. It's a Superbum.
It's Superbum, yes.
And when you see the plant, it's really big. It is a Superbum.
It is. Next one we have is pretty rare. It's Ridleyi, and that's from Southeast Asia. And I did not know this. It has a symbiotic relationship with ants.
Wow.
Yes. So the ants, ant colonies live in parts of the basal leaves. And of course, the ants probably bring food back for it, like a lot of ant plants. A lot of plants that have a symbiotic relationship with ants. The ants bring stuff back. They die. They poop in there. And all that is used by the plant. Most of the plants that have a symbiotic relationship with ant plants tend to be epiphytic. So they're looking for ways of getting nutrients. And then in turn, if anything tries to eat the plant, of course, the ants are going to come out and attack it.
Which means that if you see them growing in the wild, do not try to eat one.
Do not try to eat one. No. So that's Ridleyi. And Ridleyi, it's unique because its fronds grow upwards.
And another thing about Ridleyi that I only recently discovered when we finally got leaves with spores on them is that the spore producing leaf on Ridleyi is actually a little more specialized than the regular non-shield, not the shields,
the
leaves,
fertile,
the fertile leaves.
Yeah.
That actually produces a sort of like a spoon-shaped leaf that's a little smaller than the regular leaves, and that's what has the spores on it. So it's actually 3 types of leaves on a Ridleyi.
Yeah, interesting. And it's one of the smallest species, and we grow it so it's from Southeast Asia, but we grow it in our desert room. So it takes the heat, but we literally have the base of it sitting in a pot of water. Now we've tried to grow, we had another one of it, and died. And then, so for some reason, it's happy in a really hot, dry-ish greenhouse, but sitting in a pot of water. Now the fertile leaves are out, and most of the basal leaves are out. but it's so I don't know if that's creating a little bit of a humidity dome for it.
Well, it is
Um,
sitting on a pot of water, of course, too.
exactly. So I mean, but you don't. It's not. Yeah. So I wonder what the humidity is right there compared to. But we had it in a cooler room and did not like that. So.
But we just got when we received that
Mhm.
donation recently. I think there's at least one Ridley eye in there, and we have it just with the rest of our Staghorn ferns, and it's certainly not going downhill. It's actually doing quite well right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid to move the one in the desert room.
Oh yeah, I would
So it's
not
good
move
that we have
anything
two.
that's one of the
Yeah.
things we always say is if it's successful,
Mhm.
leave it. Or what is the phrase? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. Exactly. We have one called Hilly, which is from Australia, Queensland, Australia. And then I mentioned the cross we have. And then we have the alicorn. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That's from Madagascar and Mozambique. And elephantotis.
Which is a beautiful one.
Yeah, coronarium from Southeast Asia, Indonesia. And the one you mentioned too is Andinum. And that's I think it must be from South America because it's considered the American staghorn from
It's the only
Peru,
one that's from
Bolivia.
the South. That's from the newest New World
Yeah.
species. It's the only one from South
Yeah.
America.
So we have them all growing. Now we have them, most of them, except for the bifurcatum, which is growing everywhere. We just had one donated. Do you think the one that is out in the shade structure outside is bifurcatum? It has to be, right?
My guess is yes. Which brings us to one quick point, which is
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of them, if there's no label on them, and they're the obvious, like the one we have, which
Mm-hmm.
is Platycerium andinum, that's obvious. But if they look like Platycerium bifurcatum, they could be that. They could be a cross, accidental or on purpose, and you'll never know.
Because there are differences. Now, if I were to look at the one outside that was donated to us, that's about 3 feet across, and we have it grown in a shade house versus ours that are growing in the greenhouse. Yeah, it looks a little different. It could be growing conditions made something grow a little bit different. Harsher conditions, it could have smaller leaves if it was more
Right.
sun, more drought, or it could be a cross and they didn't label it as that.
Right.
So
I would like to
bifurcate.
add that
Yeah.
I have the one that I have that's been growing outside for a good, I'm going to say 15 years, maybe 12 to 15 years. It looks like bifurcatum, but bifurcatum's shield fronds are round on the top, and this one has what I always call the little hat. It's got
Mm-hmm.
little extensions on its leaves. So to me, that means it's got to be at the very least a hybrid.
Yeah, and yeah, I think there's a lot more hybrids out there. I doubt we're finding these pure species that just people happen to have because I think they wouldn't make it if they were growing outside for the
Right.
most part. Um, so we have 9 of the 18 species. What is on your list that we should be getting?
Well, we do need to get one of my favorites, which is Platycerium madagascarensis.
You and everyone
have
else,
we have a
Bruce.
dead one.
I was about to say, shh.
Yeah, I do see somewhere
Yeah.
a label on a
Mm-hmm.
piece of wood
Mm-hmm.
that is
Okay,
Platycerium
we have tried.
madagascarensis.
We have had, I want to say, 2 come through.
And
Man, it's in everyone. It's one of these where everyone will argue about where it should be grown, and next thing I know, I don't know where it's at. Everyone's moving it around, and that's
well,
what certain people do. And and I let it go because I want people to be involved in it. And if I don't have the time to watch these particular plants, but sometimes it gets a little like where it's infighting of people. Like, no, it's going to grow better here. No, it's going to
well,
grow better here. Next thing I know, I'm like, guys, it's dead.
well, I as the fern and aroid guy, but as the
Hmm.
fern guy there, um, when we get one, can basically say, because I have nothing that's preventing me from just yelling at the employees because I'm not paid.
Except
But
for I'll hear it. They'll come up to me. Bruce
Bruce
yelled
is
at
mean
me.
to me.
Bruce is mean to me.
But seriously, that we need to. Why would we? Let's go back a bit. Why do we love Platycerium madagascariensis?
Yeah, why do we?
Because the shield fronds of that have these amazing ridges where all the veins of the leaf are. So it's got this great corrugated
Hmm.
basal frond which is just wonderful. The main frond of it, the fertile frond is, it's a fertile frond,
Yeah.
but the basal
Hmm.
frond, the shield fronds are just fantastic.
It's
They're so,
they're fun to take
rich.
pictures of when the light is hitting a lot of these staghorn ferns. You just go, wow, because the veins pop through. And I always
Right.
look at my hands going, how come the veins on my hand don't get the same like oohs and ahs as the
Well, we don't
veins?
want that on our hands.
No.
So that's one we have to get. There's also another one called Platycerium grand or grandi,
Yes.
depending on how you want to
Yeah.
pronounce it,
Hmm.
which looks a lot like Superbum,
It does.
but I think it's a little harder to grow and it's a little more cold sensitive. We didn't add that Platycerium superbum can be grown outdoors under
Yeah.
somewhat more protected conditions.
I'm not risking it. If you propagate a lot from spores and get them to good size, then maybe we'll test it. But,
Well,
it's one of
my
those where it's a high risk.
yeah, I will say that mine has been outdoors for 2 years now. It went through only one winter. I believe I got it in the winter, so it probably stayed indoors that winter. But it's gone through on my north wall of my garage, which means no direct sun, a little bit of protection with a overhang. But that's been out for 2 years now. And when we had a frost, the tips of the leaves that were not covered by the overhang
Hmm.
did burn.
Yeah.
And of course, if I lose the growth spurt, the growth point on that, it's dead. But the nice thing is that the growing point is buried deeper in the plant. It's still exposed to the elements, but it's
Uh-huh.
a little bit more protected by a lot of fuzzy little bases of the leaves. So that gives it a little bit of additional protection. If
Yeah.
it goes down to 27 or so, I'm probably going to do something,
Yeah.
cover it or bring it indoors.
Yeah.
But it can be grown outdoors if you have good protection. And what's really great is if you have that thing growing outdoors and you want to have a tropical looking garden, well, that's going to do it.
Yeah, that would do it. Yeah. I want to get into some of the problems. You mentioned cleaning them up and yeah, two of the pest problems we have, mealybugs, usually long-tailed, but could be other mealybugs, and scale. And that could be uh, like a hard scale, barnacle scale. So those are the two major pests that they get. And because it's a relatively small plant, it could easily be controlled by just rubbing alcohol, wiping it off, soap spray, but you do want to wipe it off and get a control of it because it can. And don't just assume you don't have a problem when you see the top of the leaf. They're underneath the leaves.
And they'll also hide in areas that you might not even
Hmm.
see if you don't take the leaf in your hand and look under it by lifting it up.
Yep. Yeah. We have to prune ours because it becomes where they hang down. So either the fertile fronds are so long they're in the walkway, or it's so crowded that the beneficials don't have access to the pests. Or I'm worried about the weight. So as the fertile leaves start dying, you could cut those off or cut portions. Now I avoid doing that with the superbum because they don't produce that many fertile leaves at all.
Yeah, you might have one with, I'm
Mhm.
going to say 3 leaves, and
Mhm.
it's a perfectly beautiful plant because those leaves are so big.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might have only 3 leaves on
Yeah,
it.
whereas the Veitchii ball or large bifurcatums all go through and are all prune or have students go through 'em. Each growth point prune out X number of leaves.
And it makes the plant look better.
It looks, you could see into it. You could see the shield leaves. So don't be afraid of pruning if the plant's healthy. You could prune it all the way down. And then you mentioned the growth point. Well, we've had them where we've propagated them and all the fertile leaves have fallen off. Doesn't mean the plant's dead. Doesn't mean it's
No.
dead. So don't give up on it yet. There's still hope. There's still a chance. So just because it loses those, and even then, if the basal leaf is brown, the growth point still could be alive. So don't give up on it.
And remember that it's normal on some, but not all species, for the basal leaves to turn brown. That's
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
natural process of the way the plant grows. I want to add also that sometimes on the ones that do produce, we call them pups, but basically side growths,
Yeah.
you will see sometimes if you remove, for whatever reason, a basal frond falls off, you'll see little teeny green dots on the brownish area under the leaf. And what those are, not always, sometimes they just, some other weed, but usually what those will be is little buds growing where new plants are going to come off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great when you see that, because
Yeah.
then you know that your plant's healthy and it's giving you a lot of new potential plants.
Yeah. I do want to put the warning that it is covered. The plants generally are covered in trichomes, little hairs. That's the white dusting. So a lot of people think, oh, are those the spores? No, that's its white
No.
dusting that prevents desiccation. The leaves are pretty thick, but it's still trying to prevent water loss. But man, if you've ever pruned one and those go airborne, because they come off and they go into your throat, you will know it because you will have a coughing fit. So if you are sensitive to things floating down your lungs and making you tickle and cough, wear a mask anytime you're pruning them because they're very annoying.
Yeah, probably a good idea. Now, I've never done that and I've never had a problem, but it makes a lot of sense. And I'm actually very sensitive to airborne things, but I'm just lucky it's never happened.
Yeah.
Can we go back a little bit to the scale issue?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to give as an example our magnificent Platycerium andinum, which was, I don't know, 2 years ago, it was a nothing, right? It was just it looked like it was going to die. The reason it was so unhappy is because it was literally, as they say, covered in scale. Scale. And I don't think there was a leaf that didn't have wall-to-wall scale on it.
Okay, making me feel great here as the curator.
The point I'm making is that all I did, we didn't use any insecticides or anything that's potentially dangerous for in your house. All I did is I went over every single leaf with a paintbrush, some cotton swabs, and just removed them all.
Yep.
And I only did it once.
Yeah.
And that was all the plant needed to be healthy. It's bug free now. I do look at the plants every week that I'm there, but that was all that was needed to keep the plant essentially bug free and allow it to start growing. And it's now a specimen plant.
It is
from 2 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think we're going to have to move it soon.
Well, I actually have started to divide it up because it's getting too big.
Yeah.
But the point is that while they are very much loved by scale, it's easy to get rid of, and it just requires moderate diligence every time you look at the plant. And if you see a scale here and there, just remove it with your fingers, wash your fingers off so you don't push it on some other plant, and maybe give it a rinse with a little bit of alcohol.
And those leaves are thick enough that they could take alcohol. It's a good idea to dilute it a little bit with water, but they're thick enough where you won't desiccate a leaf. And like you said, you only had to do it once. So you want to avoid using rubbing alcohol too many times on a single leaf, but they're pretty darn thick and they could take it. And then it's just like any house plant, any plant, monitoring is key. Don't let it get to that point of where it's,
But the beauty part of it is that we took an infested plant and made it perfectly clean, and it stayed clean. Now, there are some plants like alocasias, which are loved by spider mites, and you can clean it off Monday and then Friday they're back.
Yeah.
That's not happened with the staghorns with the scale.
Yeah. I think I listed all the species we have, mentioned some that we want. There's not too many more. We have a genus with only 18 species, which means we can collect them all.
Collect them all.
We just got to find them. And then we're propagating bifurcatum for plant sales. That's why we're so busy, because at our plant sale last time, every single one sold out. You think, nurseries have them, but people still love them, and they're really rewarding to grow. They're so different looking. They're fun, easy once you get the spot dialed in for at least certain species. Anything else you want to say on them?
There are a couple of species that we must get.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Madagurensis, grandi.
One day. That is the biggest of them.
Yes.
Or pretty close to the biggest. I think from the top to bottom of the plant could be easily 8 feet.
Yeah, we need a bigger greenhouse before that. But
as they say, I think we're going to need a bigger greenhouse.
But I mean, our superbum, what would you say? Our superbum is maybe 2 feet at most from bottom of the shield leaf to the top of the shield leaf. And that thing is, 25 years? I've worked there 17 years, and I know it's at least a few years older. It could be 25 to 30 years old. So it's very slow growing. So I imagine the grande is, am I pronouncing that? Yeah, it's grande. So, which is, you want it to be 8 feet. 8 feet would be amazing, but you also want to be able to, have space for it.
Right. There are those of us who love growing giant-sized leaved plants, and then what happens is we discover that we're successful. The only thing worse than being not successful is being successful.
Well, yeah, it's like when you bring a palm or a banana in, you're like, yay, we have this. And then it hits the ceiling. You're like, yay, it's a monocot. We have to cut the top off and there's no chance of it coming back. Well,
Right.
especially palm, at least bananas.
And by the way,
spread
though,
up.
if you're growing bifurcatum, that will become enormous through the multiple growth points.
Yeah, 5 feet across. That's the one. And I know people. And they definitely get bigger than that. Definitely.
There's one at Longwood Gardens. Now, I haven't been to Longwood Gardens in a few years. Longwood Gardens is on the East Coast. It's considered by many to be the best botanical garden, more for ornamental gardening in the world, not just in the country, in the world. It's different from Kew Gardens, which is more botanically oriented, but it is a fantastic place to go. And if you have the chance, go. They have a Staghorn fern, and it's probably a bifurcatum. From my understanding, it's at least 10 feet across.
Yeah.
It's this enormous ball in the middle of one of their greenhouses.
I shouldn't have cut the 5 feet one. It wasn't my choice. We should have left that. And that was probably about 10 years ago. So it would have been that big now. We could have rivaled Longwoods.
Well, we can do that whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. We're not cutting some of them. Yeah. Yeah. I just don't want to lift it. Yeah. That's all I've got to say on this. I mean, there's so much more. You could dive into each one individually and talk about it more, but I think we covered all the major aspects of it.
Yeah. And I think I want to add that if you're start with bifurcatum, then work your way into superbum and Hilii, Wallingii is another one. Those are pretty easy, and Vetchii. Then, if you can get sources for the other ones, by all means try them. It's really great for us plant freaks to be able to have every member of a genus growing in our gardens, and you can do that at home.
Yes.
Sure, you're going to have these enormous plants.
Yeah.
And they're not all super easy to grow, but there's something wonderful about saying, we have an entire representation of the entire genus in our greenhouses.
Yeah, I think we're going there. I think we're going to make that a goal.
Our goal.
That is our goal. And I think we could get it pretty soon. I think we could get it. We just have to source them. We just have to make a point of sourcing. And it's not like you could go on Platyceriums R Us. A lot of these you have to source them from different places. Right. Yeah.
Typically, when you find a Platycerium nursery that has listed the one you want, you say, wow, they got the one I want. And you click on it and it says sold out.
Sold out.
They had one.
2 of them. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, hopefully we'll post some pictures. So look for this on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll post some pictures of the different species that we're talking about. And if you have anything to add to this, or you have a giant staghorn fern that you're growing, go ahead and you can either post on the social media when we post that, or you could send it to marlenetheplantlady@gmail.com along with any questions you have. And as far as Instagram and Facebook, it's Marlene the Plant Lady. Follow there. And of course, share this episode. If you love the podcast, give it a 5-star ranking on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And on Apple, if you could leave a nice note saying, wow, that was a great episode on Staghorn ferns. It's staggering how much Bruce knows about Staghorn ferns. Or I love the site for sore, right? Any plant
site for sore. There actually are optometry offices called site for sore eyes.
Oh, of course. I think, yeah. But anyways, the reviews will just move us up where people could see us. And until next time, everyone, happy gardening.
See you next time.